So now I want to say something about China and the renminbi and this article, which is a very interesting article. Bob McCauley talks about the Chinese monetary system, the Chinese credit system, the Chinese bond market, okay, as having three tracks. Okay. There's the first track, which is the old track. So this is communism, or the controlled economy. And there's a lot of this still, okay, where banks are told who to lend to and at what interest rate. You know, this is just a decision about allocation of resources, and it's not being driven by market incentives or whatever. That's the first track. But he says China has, over the last, and we know this, we read the newspapers, has loosened up around the edges, okay, and has allowed there to be some free borrowing and lending where the interest rate fluctuates depending on demand and supply, and that's the sort of peripheral markets. And this is true there's a money market, maybe a little interbank market, bond market, loan market. Okay, and there's small numbers here, but there's stuff happening there. And the reason they did this, or one reason they did this, was with the view that having some market signals is better than having none, okay, and having some control is better than having none. So they're trying to create a blend here where if you're transitioning, you're nonetheless controlling most of it, and it's a controlled transition. Okay. Now, what McCauley adds to that, what's going on now with the internationalization of the renminbi, okay, is a third track. Outside. Okay. The analog in his mind, pretty clearly, is the rise of the eurodollar market for the US dollar in the late 50s, early 60s. And what was the eurodollar market? The eurodollar market was a place offshore, outside the control of the US regulatory authorities, where people were making deposits and making loans in dollars, okay, in dollars, without the US having anything at all to do with it. It was a separate market. It was a way of evading, it was often used as a way of evading controls inside the US, capital controls, interest rate controls, controls on how much you could pay a depositor, all that sort of thing. Reg Q, he talks about. Okay. Not so different, right? Not so different. That's what's going on here, okay? There's an outside market developing. At the moment, it's not very, and the prices, there's some fascinating little charts in there. The prices in the outside market are different than the prices in the peripheral markets, which of course are different than these controlled prices, but he's comparing this one and this one. Okay, and he finds that these prices are not right on top of each other, which shows that there are obstacles to trading back and forth. You know, if there were no obstacles, you would expect arbitrage to keep them smack on top of one another. Just as you would expect the eurodollar interest rate to be basically smack on top of the Fed funds rate. Okay? These are the sort of equivalents here. And in general, the eurodollar rate and the Fed funds rate are smack on top of each other, you know, within a few basis points. You might call them gold points, okay? Because it takes some money to do these transactions, so you don't necessarily expect them to be exactly the same. What's interesting about these charts too is that you see in moments of stress, he keeps emphasizing the third, fourth quarter of 2011, okay, these prices move farther away from each other, okay? So just as happened in the crisis with the eurodollar rate versus the Fed funds rate. I've shown you that chart so many times, you must have it memorized by now. So the same phenomenon is happening here, that there's an internationalization part of this. It's just beginning though. He talks about the money markets, It talks about the bond markets. Interesting thing is that the the bond market that's outside China actually has a lower yield than inside China. Okay, and the reason for and lower quality credit. And the reason is because people outside who are holding renminbi deposit accounts are switching into the bonds to get a little interest rate, a little more positive interest rate. They cannot switch into the bonds that are sold inside China. So again, it's an arbitrage problem. Okay, but it's going to change. Okay. As you get an offshore renminbi market, there are going to be prices here, and people will find ways to say, well, if the price is better here, then I'm going there. Okay, and so this is the beginning of something that could be really pretty big. Okay, and so far the Chinese authorities seem to be allowing it. Okay, more or less in the same way that they allowed this. This track 2. Okay. This is potentially a much bigger deal, right? Because you can't kind of turn this off so easily once it's developed. And the analogy, and behind the scenes, of course, in all of this discussion, whenever he talks about the eurodollar market, you're talking about the renminbi as a world reserve currency. The notion that and why? Because China is a surplus country. Okay. And if you're a surplus country, that means everyone has to make a payment to you, okay? And the survival constraint is asymmetric, okay? If everyone has to make a payment to you, your liabilities are money, period. Your liabilities are money. And that's the way it was for the US after World War I and after World War II. And it's not true anymore that everyone has to make a payment to the U.S., but we have this international eurodollar market that doesn't have that much to do with the balance of trade of the U.S. Okay, and we will see what happens with the renminbi, whether they're exploring this. I like this article by McCauley because it shows in the most dramatic way, okay, what we're dealing with here in foreign exchange, which is it's a relationship between the state and the market. Okay, it's a relationship that is negotiated and is going to be different in different countries. Okay, in the United States, the central bank basically doesn't screw with the exchange rate. The dollar, it allows the private market to work. So in the United States, if the United States was a surplus, was on one side here, this stuff works pretty well, because there's very deep markets in everything with a dollar on one side of it, in spot markets and also forward markets. Okay, in other countries, there are no dealers making these markets, and so it's central banks that are making these markets. The state is in there from the beginning. Okay, and there's all ranges in between. Okay, is the point. So there are these different kinds of cases. And what I'm trying to help you see is these aren't, it's not as if they're ideological choices. A lot of them is about where you are as a country in the hierarchy of international money. If you're near the top, you're going to look like that. Okay, if you're near the bottom, you're going to look like that. Okay, and if you're somewhere in the middle, it's going to be a hybrid. Okay, that foreign exchange is inherently hybrid. Inherently hybrid. It's where states meet states and markets meet markets, both. Okay, and that's what makes it, as I say, this is sort of in a way the hardest lecture of the whole semester. Okay, because of that. That's why, because it's conceptually there are more wheels turning than in any other lecture. In order to make this go. But once you've mastered this, you've mastered something that will serve you in good stead for a long time, because it will help make sense of things that otherwise seem random, or you hear all these arguments about, oh, the central bank shouldn't intervene because that's going to make markets inefficient. Well, that could be true, okay, but it also could be not true, okay? It kind of depends. And now we know how to think about that, okay? Or, no capital controls are always bad, or whatever. It's not, there's no general rule about these matters. Once you understand the way the system works, that it's inherently a hybrid system, and there's no necessity for the prices to be equal to their efficient levels. The abstraction from liquidity that is so characteristic of economists, economists of all political stripes, by the way. This is not a left-wing argument or a right-wing argument. Everyone abstracts from liquidity. Everyone, okay? And, but liquidity doesn't abstract from them. The survival constraint is a real thing, and people have to solve this problem every day. And this is how they solve it.